I'll hold y'all hand while saying this, but you suck at Magic. The vast majority of Magic players aren't at the top echelon of play, and that's okay because that's not what's fun for them. You need to find a way to engage with this game that is good for you. If we are to believe the anecdotal musings of Wizards of the Coast and other players, then much of us are actually at the kitchen table or playing Commander, where a lot of us aren't really, again, playing at the upper echelon, going for the Pro Tour, winning our RCQs, or doing anything remotely competitive. We're just here to enjoy the game. But in today's video, I wanted to highlight how even at the casual level, at a Commander pod, it's very important to play to the rules and use the rest of the video to go over some of my favorite interactions in all of Magic, showcasing why playing to your outs really is important and how these small things can really make or break a win or a loss. Magic is just an insanely good game because of it. So we're going to use this Reddit post for framing, but again, we're going to go over how not only is this post just a funny example in Commander, but how playing to your outs and playing to these small details can really make or break a game and how it ends up interacting. So a lesson in sequencing and getting too excited. So showing your whole hand. Commander game, I'm running Ovika, Enigma, Goliath, extra turns. Relevant board state, we've got lots of mana, a Hedron Archive that allows to draw 2 cards, and Chandra Hope's Beacon on board. One of my opponent has multiple morph cards face down. The other opponents have nothing relevant. So it's really just kind of between that one person here. So if you kind of go through Hedron Archive, a mana rock that you're able to sacrifice and draw 2 cards, very relevant there. And then Chandra Hope's Beacon, a really good planeswalker here that whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you may copy it. You may choose new targets for that copy. This ability triggers only once each turn. So if you go back to the post here, essentially, if they find an extra turn spell, they should be able to win the game since Chandra doubles it. And from there, they should be able to find like more extra turn spells and then cast Ovika, which if we kind of go through here, Enigma Goliath, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create X/1/1 red Phyrexian Goblin creature tokens, where X is that spell's mana value. So if you cast like a 5 mana Time Warp, you're going to get 5 X/1/1 red Phyrexians. And if you take a bunch of extra turns, like yes, they have haste, but you're going to be able to amass like a massive board after just casting a bunch of extra turn spells. That's the general idea. And since I've got Chandra on board, I feel pretty safe that I'm going to win since my opponent will have a stop would have to stop both my original spell and the Chandra copy, which is pretty fair. Like generally speaking, 2 counter spells, or you just get to go off with at least 1 extra turn. I +1 Chandra to exile 5 cards, and the only relevant one that I hit is Commandeer, which is pretty powerful. You can cast it for 7 and take control of a spell, or you can play it and exile 2 other blue cards from your hand to cast it for free. I've got 2 blue cards in my hand, none of which are counter spells. My opponent tells me after the game that they thought in the moment, like, oh, I wonder what they're going to do here. I then sack the Hedron Archive to draw 2 cards. One of the cards drawn is Expropriate, which I know, which I cast knowing I'm going to win. Expropriate, obviously, you don't choose the extra turns, but that's not the point of this. I just hope people aren't in 2025 giving people extra turns with Expropriate. Please self-report in the comment section and give me a relevant situation where that actually matters. Like, are you actually winning by giving your opponent extra turns to Expropriate? You're not. I don't know if you can prove that, right? So cue my opponent who's been biding their time and playing Yu-Gi-Oh! At this point. I unmorph, turn out my face down trap card, Void Mage Apprentice, targeting Expropriate, and then I stifle the Chandra trigger. So unless you got both stifle and a counter, you're not getting 2 extra turns at least. So I put the 2 blue cards in response to that. So they're countering the Expropriate, and the Chandra triggers to copy the Expropriate, right? So they're gonna have to vote on multiple things. And then they stifle the Chandra trigger. So I put both blue cards in my hand in exile and slowly reach for the pile Chandra exile, cast Commandeer, targeting Stifle, targeting the Void Mage ability. So taking control of that and countering that. My opponent's face turns white, realizing his mistake, and both he and my other opponents agree that due to the way he declared cards, I was allowed to do it. I guess in this case, like really what happens here is that you put both spells on the stack at the same time. Really what could have happened is we know that Chandra, if I'm not mistaken, if we go back through the exile top 5 cards in your library, yeah, so those are exiled face up. So you're gonna have knowledge of the Expropriate, right? So, getting too excited, not reading what's going on. If you just cast the Void Mage, let that resolve, then cast the Stifle, right? Like, so you can let points of the stack resolve and let those happen. So you can first, you know, depending on how the stack resolved, Expropriate goes on, Chandra then triggers and goes on top of that. So what you can do is you can cast Stifle on the Chandra trigger. Then after that resolves, Stifle is gone, you can then cast Void Mage to then copy that. So opponent got too excited, played it all out, and you know, they got burned by that. And this is a case where, yes, you can do this. You can cast the Void Mage Apprentice, hold priority, and then Stifle, all that good stuff. Now, I believe like Void Mage Apprentice actually has like a ETB trigger, but really what happens here is it's a sequencing thing. And they just did things one at a time, they would have been fine. An example of how when you get too excited and you don't think about what you need to play around, you can really get burned. And Commander itself is an eternal format. It has access to all cards in Magic's history with a relevant ban list attached to it. Similar to Vintage, similar to Legacy, and in Pauper. Vintage and Legacy, for those of you that are unaware, the difference is, again, it's not just the Power 9. Really, the ruling is that they both have the same legality. It's that legality as a base, but Vintage works with a ban list and a restricted list. So because things are restricted, you still have access to many cards if at you know, just as a one-up. But you also have Legacy, which is a ban list. There's no restrictions, there's no one-ups. You just have a card, you have cards that are just banned. So different play patterns altogether. But when it comes to a simple interaction here, something that, you know, you may not be even ready to play around. The example that we showcase was where everyone had perfect information. They may not just have chosen to, you know, look through it. But this is a fun one that I had from Mengucci like so long ago. You know, and this one was where Thragtusk is going to enter and gain the Tron opponent 5 life, right? It's going to gain the Tron opponent 5 life. Now, what happens here is that because the opponent has 1, if we take a look at Mengucci's hand here, he actually has a Vapor Snag. Vapor Snag returns a creature and deals 1 damage to that opponent. So Thragtusk enters, ETB trigger on the stack, you can Vapor Snag to get your opponent to lose 1 life. Now, this isn't a scenario that is in an eternal format, just like I was kind of alluding to, or one that an opponent can necessarily like play around. They're probably dead the next turn. But really, it's relevant. It's a pretty funny interaction and one that your opponent's not necessarily looking to play around. Vapor Snag is not really a relevant Magic card right now. In 2022, maybe more so. Things are just vastly different. But a funny interaction that goes to show how funny things can be in Magic and how many corner cases you do get access to with something like Vapor Snag, at least being able to do 1 damage in the Izzet Prowess Brew that we have here with Sprite Dragon. Now, one that I actually saved recently, I made a TikTok on this coming up later this week, like kind of crediting Michael here, but this is a welcome to Legacy play. So for those of you that are not understanding what's happening here, in Legacy, the unfair thing to do is just the base level. So you have a bunch of free spells that exist in Legacy, and that is the baseline. In Modern, Pioneer, Legacy, the free spells or the spells that are reduced are generally speaking the unfair things, especially when you think about something like Pioneer. But in Modern, the free spells are the broken things, right? Those are the powerful things, Force and Negation being very limited, Endurance being there as well. These are generally the powerful things. But in Legacy, that is the status quo. So in blue decks, you generally are always expecting something like Force of Will, which is a free counterspell, which acts as a police in the format against the free broken things. Those decks generally also play Daze. So a regular thing that happens in Vintage is if your opponent plays a blue source or a fetch land for a blue source, you have to generally immediately think, play around Daze. Daze is a 2-mana counterspell that you may return an island you control to your hand and get your opponent and, you know, kind of cast the spell and counter target spell unless your opponent plays 1. So you have to always think about, if I'm going to try and go off on turn 1, if I don't have a Simian Spirit Guide or an Elvish Spirit Guide or an extra source of mana somehow through maybe like a Mox, can I resolve this spell? And so Daze is available here. So opponent here, Eureka 224, Michael Reed here, cast Reanimate on a target. Generally speaking, is probably just going to be a game-winning target or a really powerful target that's going to push them far enough ahead. Maybe something like Atraxa, Grand Unifier, going to draw them like 4 or 5 cards. What happens here is, you know, Reed also has a Wasteland on an opponent's fetch. Where the opponent makes their mistake here is that they cast Endurance before fetching. What happens now is Endurance is on the stack to shuffle Reed's graveyard and make the Reanimate moot. Cool. They have 1 mana. They have the fetch land. The problem is, in response to the Endurance, Reed can now, because he's been given priority, Reed can now activate Wasteland, targeting the Verdant Catacombs. you would say, okay, they're going to destroy my non-basic. I'm just going to fetch in response. The wasteland goes away. But then in response to the fetch, before the mana even hits the battlefield, them searching for a mana to pay, Reed can then cast Daze to then counter the Endurance. So opponent had a sequencing problem here. Opponent did not play around the Daze. What they should have done here is cast Endurance, held priority, sacked the Verdant Catacomb, gotten their 1 mana. It's likely they still could have gotten a basic, but usually you would get a non-basic. If you're able to get a basic, great. You likely would go to the wasteland anyway, but then you can at least pay the 1 and play around the Daze, because now the reanimate is going to resolve and you're going to lose the game. You lost 1 card to an evoked Endurance. You lost 2 cards to try and stop this. You are likely going to get your land. Sure, the wasteland's going to nullify, but now we have an Attraction. We're going to win the game. And so another example of in Magic how the status quo is there in an Eternal format. You are always thinking to play around Daze. This is turn 2. This is literally turn 1 for the opponent, turn 2 for Michael. You are thinking about playing around Daze in a deck that resolves Underground Sea. That is just baseline. That's what you're doing. Now, playing Wasteland would inform more as to the type of blue deck that you could be, but generally speaking, you are looking to play around Daze. And so with that information available, with that idea available, opponent did not play around it properly, and this is a great interaction in Legacy that just goes to show you you do have control over the situation here. Unlike the last situation, you just need to play around it right to the appropriate situation, but very much so, welcome to Legacy. Now, this is actually a video from myself, recent video, fastest wins in Pauper, 1 land spy. I was taking it out for a spin. What's happening here is we're in the spy mirror, quote unquote, but I'm playing 1 land spy. My opponent's playing 4 land spy. They're playing Walls spy. Wall Spy traditionally right now is playing 4 lands. It is able to generate extra mana, but it requires a minimum of 4. 5 land Spy is different. 2 land Spy is different. 1 land Spy is different. There's multiple iterations of Spy, but I can tell based on the Kyrian Ranger and the Cerulean Caretaker that this is Wall Spy, and my opponent has 4 lands. So if I play it out from here, I 1 land spy resolve my Balustrade Spy, knowing that my opponent has put all 4 lands they have onto the battlefield to confirm the win on their side on their turn. What opponent did not realize though is that because the win of 1 land spy in Pauper, not Legacy, in Pauper, is sorcery speed, I can resolve my own Balustrade Spy, targeting them, making them lose the game. Because right now, obviously, I have 2 mana. I have the resources to go off on my end. The problem is the minute I resolve this card, my opponent still hasn't conceded, knowing that I have my 2 mana up. So I can mill myself, reanimate 2 creatures, and then Dread Return targeting my Lot-Led Giant and win the game. My opponent has not conceded. So that clues me into the fact that they have 3 cards in hand. They probably have a piece of Graveyard Hate in their hand, if not a Fairy Macabre. Okay, sure. I'm going to turn at their face. So I completely control this game at this point because my opponent milled themselves to the point of, having, or sorry, not milled themselves, tutored a bunch of cards to the point where they have no lands left. I am now going to be able to win the game by targeting them. So I point it at them right here. They mill out completely. They go to 0 cards in deck. We continue through because I still have cards in my library. How are they going to shuffle things back in? Right now, 1 land spy is not playing those shuffle effects, and opponent is just woefully confused. So there you go. That mill guy wins the game there. And so another example of an internal format where, because you have access to these really powerful effects, these niche cases do matter. You're playing the spy mirror and you're not looking for me to mill you out, because usually you're just looking to interact with your opponent and just mill yourself out. You're not thinking about the reverse situation where I could do that to you. And also, because you're not conceding, I'm gaining a level of information showcasing that you probably have an additional piece of interaction. So again, because I have complete control of this situation, Balustrade Spy, if it was printed now, would probably be much more balanced. I'm now able to target you and win the game from there. Notably, another situation is going to be from a recent video that I made on Legacy Mill. I realized I called this Legacy Expert Mill. I got to go change that. Yikes. But the league itself was like a giant flop, but this was a great interaction point. So opponent's on Cloud Post in Legacy, and they have a Chalice of the Void on 1. So all my spells of 1 converted mana cost are going to get countered. So I have a Consign to Memory. Level 1 is that Consign to Memory. Yes, the initial version of it is going to get countered because it costs 1. But when I cast Consigned Memory for its replicate cost, if I cast it for 2, 1 blue and a replicate, I get 2 copies of Consigned Memory. The second copy is not cast, so it cannot get countered. And so I can counter this Karn the Great Creator. The problem is, Karn the Great Creator is my #1 issue in terms of being resolved. If they resolve another Karn the Great Creator, or if they resolve it at any point, I just have to concede it. I'm not going to be able to deal with the resolved Karn the Great Creator with the amount of mana that they have and the amount of resources that they have out of the sideboard. The problem is Expropriate has Split Second. So level 1, I can stop this Karn. Spoiler alert, they have another Karn the Great Creator coming down the line and I need to get rid of it. Expropriate has Split Second, meaning I cannot react to it and my opponent can't react to it. The problem is it costs 1 mana. I can't surgical the Karn the Great Creators out of their deck because Expropriate gets countered by something like Chalice of the Void on 1. But if I had a surgical extraction, which is actually in general probably worse overall versus this blue deck because they're going to have Force of Wills and other counter spells, as we can see in their graveyard already, Force Negations. In general, it's probably better, or sorry, worse, but Expropriate is better. But uniquely in this case, underneath the Chalice of the Void, because Expropriate has Split Second, I can't even react to it to counter the trigger ability of the Chalice of the Void. Because what I can do is I can consign, counter the Karn the Great Creator with the replicate. I can even cast Surgical, then cast Consign and replicate it twice, counter the trigger of the Chalice of the Void on my Surgical. Surgical resolves on that and like do all this fancy stuff. But level 1, I can counter the Karn, but level 2, I can't even get rid of it permanently and react to it because Expropriate has Split Second, not allowing me to get around the Chalice. Eternal Magic, folks. You win some and you lose some. Magic is such a beautiful thing. I go through it. I go through the motions of realizing the trauma of this. How Expropriate is uniquely extirpate. I realize I've been saying Expropriate the whole time, but Extirpate is uniquely bad in this specific case. So you're going to see me like kind of counter the Karn here. Cast with Replicate. So you'll see this. Choose X equals 1. I'm going to counter that. So you have to kind of pay the 2 here. And then so the Chalice Void counter is going to counter the initial Consign, but you'll see no trigger happens for this Consign because it's not cast. A copy is not cast. It will counter the Karn. That will go, but I can't cast my Expropriate, Extirpate. I keep saying Expropriate. My apologies. But another example of how great Eternal Magic is and how these crazy unique interactions can come across to stop you. And sometimes you can't play around them, but sometimes you can. The last thing I want to go over is Painter's Servant, a deck that I am still practicing and trying to get better at, one that I recently bought in paper as well. But Painter's Servant is a mid-range combo deck in the Legacy format that looks to win through a mill combo, if not just a mid-range package. Painter's Servant comes down for 2. It's an artifact creature as a 1/3. As Painter's Servant comes into play, choose a creature. So as it comes in, it doesn't have an ETB. Just as it comes in, you're gonna choose a color. All cards that aren't in play, spells, and permanents are the chosen color in addition to their other colors. So this is interesting because in a mono red Painter deck, which is the classic version of Painter, a more well-known version, what you want to do is you want to combo it with something like Grindstone, which says target player mills 2 cards, and if those 2 cards share a color, you just repeat the process. So if you activate Grindstone with a Painter Servant out, whoever you target is going to mill out completely, right? That is the general combo. They untap, they draw from an empty library, and they just lose the game. That's great. Now, it's this, generally speaking, in both the mono red version and the, actually, I would argue more popular version currently, the mono blue version or blue X version, you're always going to be naming 99% of the time blue with Painter. Because in the mono red version, you are playing red elemental blasts and pyroblasts, you will name blue with your Painter as a way to not only now turn your opponent's lands into blue cards to be able to destroy their permanents and their other spells into blue spells to be able to counter, but in the blue version, you're also going to name blue to be able to, pitch all your cards to stuff like Force of Will, which is really powerful. So in both these versions, generally speaking, you're going to be naming the color blue. And yes, your opponent is going to be potentially playing Force of Will decks that are also going to be giving them access to casting Force of Will easier, but it's fine because you are enabling, ideally, your plan even more. Where you get into niche cases is sometimes you may want to name red. Niche cases where in mono red Painter, you or a Rakdos Painter, or however you want to think about it, there are situations where you might cast your second Painter, your third Painter. You might want to name red. to be able to cast Fury to get rid of some opposing creatures if you bought Fury out of the board. Also, where it's relevant against black decks, you may actually want to name black, because Snuff Out as a free removal spell, again, not the most relevant card in the Legacy format right now. Fury more so because there are sideboards in mono red that will play Fury in Painter. But against black decks, if Snuff Out ever was to come back in favor, destroy target non-black creature, it can't be regenerated. If you play a Painter and name black, Snuff Out's not relevant anymore. So again, there are situations where, again, 99% of the time you want to name blue, but you may not actually want to, depending on the matchup you're in. And so this is where things get really interesting in terms of Eternal formats and the ways that you can interact, showcasing how there are interactions that you can take advantage of if your opponent makes a mistake. Sometimes they have control over the decisions they can make to play around those mistakes, and sometimes they don't, in the sense of the Vapor Snag. And sometimes those decisions actually completely rely on you. They happen in pregame decisions, they happen on the stack, they happen in your hand. Sometimes they happen at instant speed with stuff on the battlefield. Magic is a very complicated game. And if you don't play to all of your outs, if you open yourself up to more ways to be interacted with, you're only making really the game worse for yourself. And that's a fantastic part. You have so much control, and so does your opponent. And so you have to think about what your opponent is trying to do to stop you, and you're trying to do what you need to do to resolve your spells. There's metagaming in between. You know, you can think about sideboarding where, yes, you can bring in sideboard cards for what your opponent is doing, but then you can level too. You could bring in sideboard cards for what your opponent is bringing in against you. You know, if your main board plan is good enough and your opponent's going to bring in Graveyard Hate against your Reanimator deck, you might want to bring in, you know, artifact removal for that. And then your opponent might bring in counter magic. So you might want to bring in also counter magic or anti-counter magic, or maybe something like a defense grid in Legacy or Vintage or whatever it is, to make it so your opponent's going to have a lot harder time interacting on their turn, or on your turn, I should say, against you. So there's many different ways that you can interact with your opponent. I also want to highlight Humbro at Blue Sky for kind of pointing this thread out to me. I thought it was something I was like scripting up on my Google Doc, like kind of think tank that I have, because of that kind of Reeves tweet, by the way. I love that tweet. But I thought, hey, this is a great way to kind of base it off. So shout out to you there. But regardless, a lesson in sequencing and getting too excited, there's situations that you can take advantage of in Magic that you are aware of. And there are many situations that you might not be aware of. And that's why I started this video off by saying, generally speaking, you're not good at Magic. I'm not good at Magic. The vast majority of us don't have that ability to, in the spot right now, think of these corner cases. We may have the ability to learn, but we have to put in the time to grind. We have to learn these different formats. We have to think about these different interactions and these use cases, understand the layer system and all the evils within. We don't have the ability to really take everything out of Magic, and that's okay. That's not where the fun is. The fun is discovering these over time and maybe just having them happen in a good moment, or just ignoring them overall. But when it comes to the really good players, when it comes to the advanced mechanics that even exist within the Commander format, which is why I wanted to put together a special highlight of Eternal Magic, because these are things that can happen in certain ways in Commander. There are many different ways that these can come up, and paying attention is important. And there are so many new cards that enter our ecosphere, our pod to pod games every time we head to the LGS. But it's important to ask questions. It's important to be curious when you do have the energy to just learn and continue to engage in the game in a way that it only serves to better your play, but also improve the experience of everyone around you. That's going to be it for me, folks. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Let me know if you're this far in the video of a crazy interaction that you've had on your side. I would love to kind of go through some of those and maybe provide like counterpoints to them, or maybe analogous situations as well. Maybe turn that into a video, turning a react video into another thing video, but whatever it is, let me know. I'd love to hear your cool interactions in the comment section down below, as to whether it happened in Commander or Legacy or Vintage or Pauper or whatever it is. Yeah, even Modern, Pioneer, Standard. Let me know in the comment section down below. You'll love to hear those niche cases.